All right, this is Business and Technology in Tennessee podcast from InfoSystems, and we're on episode 5 now. And typically in this podcast series, we'll bring in people from the community or from different IT specialty companies to give business leaders, and really this podcast is intended for small and mid-sized business leaders so that they can understand a lot of the technologies that are in play today, because maybe they don't always, they're not exposed all the time to the IT discussions. And so what we really want to do here at InfoSystems is provide a resource for, our region where we're based here in East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and those surrounding areas, and help get the business leaders up to speed so that they can make better decisions for their companies and more informed decisions. And probably, also help them have conversations internally with their own IT personnel or whatever that may be. So today, I'm Josh Davis, Marketing Director at InfoSystems, and today I have with me a special guest, Andrew Gray, Sales Executive with Zerto. So tell us just a little bit about who you are and what Zerto is.
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. Zerto, I'll start there, is a business continuity disaster recovery software platform specifically designed for the virtualized environments, providing our customers with the ability to all but avoid data loss and greatly minimize downtime for the most critical applications in their environment, the ones that are the lifeblood of their company's organizational structures, the ones that the companies just can't be without. That's where Zerto specializes, and really these days, more than anything, we've become a brand protection type of software. Specifically, I'm a sales executive in the channel, per your earlier comment. So my job for Zerto is to support the integrators that deploy and configure Zerto solutions. So Zerto, while very strong at their niche, does not have concentrations outside of specifically what we do, and we rely on strong third-party integration companies to help see the whole picture, in which Zerto is one part. So my job is to support those integrators, such as InfoSystems.
Yeah, and so I was going to bring that up. I mean, InfoSystems and Zerto haven't had a long partnership. I don't know how long Zerto has been around, but it seems like there have been some really high-quality projects that have come online where we've been able to work together on a great solution for some of our customers. So how long has Zerto been around?
Yeah, sure. So Zerto sold its first product in 2011.
Okay.
Not many folks know, but Zerto's kind of on its second life. We were previously another company back in the early and mid 2000s called Kasha. But Zerto, as we know it today, has been around since 2011, and the company has grown significantly over the past 6 or 7 years, and we've recently made investments in Tennessee. So we've got a strong team of 5 or 6 folks here in the Middle and East Tennessee region. And to your point, the partnership between Zerto and InfoSystems is fairly recent. It was myself and my counterpart Brian that came up here and first introduced the concept of Zerto to InfoSystems. InfoSystems immediately saw the potential to help their customers, and like we're doing today, Zerto's very much in evangelism mode. So not a lot of folks know that Zerto exists. Not a lot of people know the capabilities that I talked about briefly previously exist. So right now we're kind of getting the word out, and InfoSystems has been great at helping us do that.
So you brought up a couple of interesting concepts, and one, I've heard you say this multiple times, brand protection.
Sure.
So I'm curious, before we really get into the meat of the conversation, is it more that issue pushed Zerto to create the solution, or was the technology the driver toward the outcome?
I would say that Zerto was going to introduce the solution regardless. I mentioned that we previously were another company, and we had a solution previously very similar to Zerto's, the difference being that it was geared towards a physical environment. As virtualization became prevalent in the industry, which Zerto had little to do with,
Yeah.
it became a common sense move to tackle the virtual workload. So that was a very organic transition for Zerto. But specifically what we've seen at Zerto, and much of what we do is driven by conversations that we have with our end users and our partners. And what we've seen is that people are more hyper aware today than ever before of how a potential disruption to their internal organization can affect their outward brand or the perception that their customers have of them. And we'll get into more of that, but that's why I mention brand protection as often as I do.
Well, let's go ahead and bring that up. I know
Sure.
you and I talked, and you had mentioned, I can't remember if it was a specific instance or you were just talking about the industry in general, but the conversation kind of revolved around healthcare.
Yeah.
And how that brand protection was so important.
Sure.
And I can't remember what the instance was because it's been a few days and I've slept since our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you could dive into that a little bit.
So we were fortunate enough very recently to win the business of one of the largest healthcare organizations in Northeast Ohio.
Okay.
They're at least top 3, maybe top 2. And as all Zerto engagements begin, the customer didn't realize that the capabilities that Zerto brought to the table even existed. As we moved through the discussion, they quickly realized that not only do those capabilities exist, but through their own internal testing, they were able to validate that they actually could be delivered against. So very quickly, we saw large levels of excitement internally. And we'll talk more about this today, I'm sure, but traditionally the excitement in the solution specific to the market that I serve has to do with minimizing downtime and data loss.
Okay.
So I always find it interesting when I get feedback outside of just that. So at the end of this engagement, as the customer was making the investment, my question to them was, what is it that compelled you to move so quickly on Zerto? Why did you want to partner with Zerto to the extent and at the speed at which you did? And I found their answer interesting. Their answer was Northeast Ohio has traditionally been their market. Recently, a couple of their competitors have moved into market, and now share of wallet, if you will, in the Northeast Ohio healthcare industry is extremely competitive. And they'd had a couple of pretty major disruptions over the past 12 to 24 months. Things that you and I probably see every day meant serious downtime for them. And what that really means for those folks is internally people shift to paper records, right? Doctors, nurses begin utilizing paper records because core systems aren't up and operational. And right behind that, you realize very quickly that means disruption to their customers. Longer waits in emergency rooms and doctors' offices that they use. So it's one thing to ask your staff to fall back to a backup paper record plan, but it's another thing to realize the implications that has on your brand. And their feedback to me was, we just can't afford any more of that. So as excited as we are about Zerto and its ability to reduce our recovery time objectives and shrink our recovery point objectives, we're even more excited because we believe Zerto is going to be the buffer between us and any additional bad press with our customers. So
it's interesting how in modern times that technology has enabled that. I mean, now the consumer's expectation in doing business is always instant, on demand, and it seems like the tolerance for any type of disruption or any impact it has on the end consumer is, I mean, immediate. Instantly you've got someone who's looking at an alternative, to potentially doing business with you. And I remember growing up, I'm not going to date myself too bad, but growing up before computers were really
prevalent,
ubiquitous in business, and everything was driven by manual and paper processes. It was just sort of an expectation when you went and did business in certain places that, something it takes time.
Sure.
You have to stand in line, and it almost created an ideal of tolerance to where, like if somebody was sick within a company and the company was really struggling to meet their customer demand for that day, people were for the most part okay with that.
Very
I mean,
tolerant.
they would,
Yeah.
you would just, yeah, okay, I understand. I've been in that situation. We'll reschedule or
Sure.
those days are gone, man.
They're
I mean,
gone.
it's crazy now how the consumer-driven mindset is pushing businesses to. I mean, it's an extreme now.
Yeah.
Like you have to be up all the time, and there's no exception. So,
Yeah, that's very true.
give me some examples. I mean, I know there's different types of downtime, and you've got planned outages
Sure.
for maintenance and upgrades, and unplanned, which is what you really want to avoid. But how does Zerto help in those scenarios?
Sure. So Zerto is a solution that's designed at its very core to be resilient. And again, we are very fortunate to be at a time and place in the IT industry where virtualization has made the abilities that we're able to deliver possible. Without a virtual workload, much of what we accomplish today could never have been. So at this very point in time, because of the abstraction between applications and the underlying hardware, what we're able to do is get very, very close to the heartbeat in a virtual environment. Where normally in the past, large amounts of data change would need to make their way through a physical server and be committed to a production storage array, and then periodically, based on scheduled intervals, be moved across the line to a separate facility. Now we're able to catch that data change instantaneously. So as soon as it occurs, we realize that change has happened, and we're constantly moving that over. What that really means to the end user, without getting very technical, is that we realize data change instantaneously, and therefore we're able to fail back in much tighter intervals.
Okay.
So just to give you an idea, not long ago in the IT industry, realizing 8 to 12 hours worth of data loss was a good job. It was a job well done for an IT staff. These days, I've got customers all over the country that at any given time could be exposed to less than 30 seconds of data loss with Zerto. And it's not just Zerto. There are many products and many enhancements that have been made in business continuity disaster recovery solutions. And again, the vast majority of that is because of what virtualization has afforded us.
Yeah. Wow. So as far as virtualization goes, is there any requirement because there are multiple virtualization platforms out there. I mean, you're talking VMware and Hyper-V and others. And there are products that have been built specific to each of one of those platforms to help do some of the things you're talking about, the backup and the recovery process and all of those things. So how does Zerto fit into that picture of different hypervisors and different solutions made for those hypervisors?
Well, that's a great question, and I can tell you that one of Zerto's core principles is to remain open and provide flexibility to the customer in as much as we can. So to your point, there are point solutions designed for very specific products or very specific hypervisors, even hypervisor levels. And then there are more open solutions that try to be more than that. Zerto is in the latter category. So as it stands today, we support all relevant versions of VMware hypervisors and Microsoft Hyper-V hypervisors. When I say all relevant versions, we support back to VMware vSphere 4.0. For point of reference, we're on 6.5 today. And we support 2012 and 2016 Hyper-V, which is their only versions. I think if you watch Zerto, you'll see other hypervisors as they become more well adopted in the industry be picked up by us as well. If I had to guess, I would say that eventually we'd probably look closely at Acropolis hypervisor. Some hypervisors have kind of fallen by the wayside over the course of history. Specifically, Citrix Zen servers is really not much of a focus at this point in time. But as a whole, Zerto's feeling is that the customer should be able to implement any hypervisor or any hypervisor version that makes sense to them for any workload and not lose any of the capabilities that it's afforded them by their solution.
So can you provide any types of examples of, when a disruption has occurred, and what happens behind the scenes for Zerto to make a recovery happen? What does the end user see?
Sure.
Maybe what happens from the IT level, and how is that different from some of the other solutions?
Absolutely. For anyone listening that isn't familiar with the recovery point objective terminology that I mentioned earlier and the recovery time objective terminology that I referenced, those are really the two core principles of the disaster recovery and business continuity effort. And really all that means is, in the event of an outage, and an outage can be many things, as you touched on earlier. These can be major weather events that everybody thinks of, like a tornado or an earthquake, but they can be human error, right? They can be an ISP link, a fiber line being broken, whatever it happens to be. But in the event of an outage, how much data loss? What's my last good copy of data at a geographically disparate location that I can draw back to, and how long has it been since that data originated? So in other words, if the outage happens at 8 o'clock p.m. and my last good copy was transferred at 4 o'clock p.m., I have a 4-hour recovery point. I've lost 4 hours worth of data. On the other side of the token, you've got the recovery time objective, and as the listener might guess, that's how long it takes to come back up at that secondary location, right? So again, the outage happens at 8 p.m. and I come back up at 8 a.m. the next day at the other location, fully functional or close to it. I've experienced 12 hours worth of downtime. I have a 12-hour recovery time objective.
Okay.
What dictates your recovery point and recovery time objectives largely is the technology that underlies your strategy. So if your storage array, for instance, is shipping I/O block changes via snapshot every 4 hours, you're exposed to 4 hours worth of data loss. Your recovery point objective could be as much as 4 hours. Again, Zerto drastically reduces the recovery point objective because we're constantly moving those data changes across in real time as they occur. On the recovery time objective side of the house, what dictates that is largely to do with how quickly a company or an administrator can execute a series of very manual and tedious steps. You've probably heard the term DR runbook. So for years now, companies have grappled with trying to put together some sort of referenceable document that walks them through a list of all the actions that need to be taken in the event of an unplanned outage at production. So very simply, what Zerto does is automates that, right? And when I say that, these are things like IP addresses. What's the IP address table for production where my normal operations ensue, and what is that set of IP addresses for my secondary data center? DNS changes, the boot order of the virtual machines. If I've got a frontline web application, it's not going to do any good at all for the web servers to come on before the SQL database is up, right? So all these things an administrator would normally need to do, A, manually, and B, at the point of the event. Zerto already has all that intelligence directly built into it. We have the capability to execute that, and we rely on the company to give us the information needed. But in the event of the disaster, to answer your question, the administrator clicks 4 buttons total, declares the disaster, and we automate all the manual steps that I just mentioned and then some, which gives us the ability to come back online typically in around 15 to 20 minutes at another site.
Yeah, wow.
And that should be fully transparent to the end users. So if someone is accessing a company HR application that's normally hosted at production, and a disaster has been declared behind the scenes and IT has shifted workloads over to a secondary data center, Zerto or any relevant business continuity disaster recovery solution should automatically switch the IP addresses, and that user who is accessing that particular HR application should be none the wiser.
Right, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so are there any considerations about the IT environment that determines whether Zerto can or cannot be inserted? what type of IT environments is this best
Sure.
built for?
Well, Zerto serves a wide range of customer sizes and verticals. I always say that there's really no customer that's too small for Zerto, because every customer has some application they really can't afford to be without.
Yeah.
You take the smallest retail operation, but they need the database that houses the information about the products that they sell or the customers they transact with. Whatever it happens to be, there's usually that lifeblood application or workload, and that's where Zerto picks up. On the other end of the spectrum, better than most solutions, Zerto scales very, very well, and it has to do with the architecture of the product. It's an all software-driven solution. Each host that, when I say host, I mean physical server, so each physical server that carries some underlying number of virtual machines is given its own dedicated resources to handle the replication of the data that it resides over. So from a top end, Zerto can scale well into the thousands of virtual machines, so you really can't find many environments at all that would come anywhere close to taxing Zerto. And then from a vertical perspective, anyone that's extremely sensitive to data loss and downtime is a great candidate for Zerto for the reasons we've mentioned.
It's just about anybody now, right?
It's really just about anybody because of the things you talked about earlier. Traditionally, our early adopters have been healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services. You take, again, I'm working with a large manufacturing company in Pennsylvania, and they were able to identify a downtime per minute cost of $10,000. If their manufacturing line isn't operational, and in IT world, that means if their SAP databases aren't accessible by their manufacturing line, and they can't get inventory and barcode information, per minute, that's $10,000 of downtime, right?
Yeah.
So you can see how a 4-hour event for that particular customer could be tragic.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where Zerto fits best.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't really have a whole lot more as in the line of questions.
Sure.
But, maybe just to finish up the episode today, we could talk a little bit about, you mentioned a couple of different places there, Ohio, Pennsylvania.
Sure, yeah.
And obviously you're sitting right here at InfoSystems headquarters in Tennessee. So what do you do on a day-to-day for Zerto, and where are you traveling to?
Yeah,
what does your
absolutely.
job entail?
So I have lived in Tennessee for most of my life, and Tennessee is where I live today, just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, between Nashville and Chattanooga, actually. And strangely enough, Zerto considers Tennessee, Ohio, and Pennsylvania as an Ohio Valley region. So I support a given region, Ohio Valley, and those 3 states that we talked about. And again, on any given day, you can find me typically alongside a Zerto integrator in front of a potential Zerto customer, helping the customer and the integrator plan a strategy that employs Zerto to make sure that their critical operations continue.
What does it usually look like when when you're going into that type of setting at a prospect's place? What all do you have to run through to sort of map out how Zerto would fit?
Well, I can tell you this about a traditional or a typical engagement. You're typically dealing with or speaking with someone that A, is very invested in making sure that his or her environment remains operational. B, have a lot of people trusting them with that very critical responsibility, and they feel the pressure of that. And C, they've been at it for a while, right? This isn't the first such engagement or conversation or planning session or effort that they've undertaken around disaster recovery for their organization. What you'll find is that many people have invested in many technologies over the years that should have solved this problem for them.
Yeah.
And for this reason or that, those technologies haven't. And again, it has to do with many different things. You've had technologies in the past that have only worked with their own brands, right? So the minute you fell outside of the underlying storage brand that you had on one side, your disaster recovery solution fell down. You've had solutions in the past that were very good at one thing or another, but not others. So typically you've got people that are at the end of their rope, and it's very fun to come in and show them the power of Zerto And I'll tell you, almost never do I speak with someone who not only has confidence in their ability to recover in the event of a disaster, but has recently proven that through a successful test, right? And that's really the most important thing. Is it's one thing to feel that you've moved data to another site and to feel that in the event of a disaster you could come back up in a reasonable amount of time, but have you been able to prove that, right? Does your solution afford you the ability at any time to quickly test and prove internally and externally to anyone concerned with auditing or compliance that you can in fact come back up quickly with minimal data loss? And again, not to overly hype the product that I represent, although I'm very passionate about it. There are other solutions that are getting better at this all the time, but Zerto specifically allows the end user with no impact whatsoever to normal replication to quickly and easily, with the click of a button, test and prove compliance for their disaster recovery solution. So I talk to customers every day who are frustrated when we begin and very happy when we're done.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding.
Exactly.
So
you have to prove it. You have to prove it.
Well, you know, for InfoSystems, it's important for us to, you know, when you think about a relationship with Zerto, it hasn't been around. We've been working together for maybe a few months now.
Right.
But have several really, I guess, good deals already on the books where we've been able to partner on a solution for our customers. But, you know, for InfoSystems, it's really important to us, and this has been our culture for a long time, is to be on the front edge of new technologies that are out there that can provide that type of end result or outcome for our customers. And so, you know, I know you all are in evangelism mode as far as, you know, getting the name of Zerto out there and just, you know, probably having those basic conversations like that with as many people as possible, you know, talking about their pain points, talking about the brand protection message, and, you know, them looking at some of the technologies they've invested in or evaluated in the past that just didn't really live up to, you know, these type of expectations.
Sure.
But, you know, to me, it's really important that InfoSystems is able to get up and running with a company like Zerto really quick. And, you know, so we probably have some resources who have already dedicated a lot of time understanding the product and the technology and the applications and uses. And so, you know, it's obvious that we're already taking that message to our customers. So what's next on the docket for you? Where are you headed after after we wrap this episode up today?
You know, I've got a few visits here locally, and then next week will probably be a trip up to Ohio. But I'm very happy to be in Chattanooga today. I like to get up here as often as I can. And let me say this about your point about InfoSystems. Again, when you talk about a Zerto engagement, there are many things that need to be considered other than my software. You know, I can get the data to the other side, but whether or not it makes its way across the network to where it needs to get, whether or not the end user can access it when it lands there, I don't have anything to say about that, right? That relies on proper network planning and a good network architect. You know, you can stand up Zerto for replication between two locations in the name of everything we've talked about here today, but if you have a single vCenter instance that covers both those locations, or a single system center instance that covers both those locations, without knowing it, what you have is a single point of failure in your disaster recovery plan. So again, those two things and many, many more really merits some serious conversation, planning, and architecture, design, and review. And this is where InfoSystems is so valuable, in my opinion. And it's a credit to InfoSystems. There are many partners out there that have forgotten what I think their main responsibility is, which is to be the ear for the customer that you talked about early in the podcast. You know, if you're the CIO of a small, medium business here in Tennessee or elsewhere, you've got a lot of things you're having to juggle, right? You're wearing a lot of different hats, and you're running around just to keep the lights on, remain competitive in your industry. And as much as you'd like to, keeping up with new technology as it's introduced is probably unrealistic.
Right.
Right? So a company like InfoSystems should be augmentation for that to you. They should be able to tell you when new technologies that could matter to you become available and become proven. So when we came here with the message, it was well adopted by InfoSystems. One of the things I liked was that, to your point, that a lot of the guys here invested time, quickly researched and became certified in our product. We got the licenses over to them. They stood them up in the lab, became familiar with how to use that. And at this point in time, InfoSystems is very well trained on the Zerto platform and has the ability to go out and bring that good message to customers. And I just think customers need to find an advocate in their integrator and make sure that those people are always remaining open to technologies that might help them become more resilient and more competitive.
Yeah, that's great. And the lab you mentioned is sitting
right behind us.
Right behind us today. So yeah, we play with all kinds of cool technology in there. It's fun. Our technicians are, and even as we record episodes of our podcast, the door swings open and people are in and out of there all the time,
Absolutely.
Because there's active work going on in our lab environment and our personal environment a lot. So it's neat. But anyway, thanks for coming out and recording a podcast with us today. I'm sure you and I will probably work together some more in the future. But for any listener who would like to get more information about Zerto and even other disaster recovery products and concepts that you need to implement in your company to have a fully baked disaster recovery and business resiliency plan, please reach out. We actually, InfoSystems offers a free consultation. We send a senior level resource out on site to spend time with prospects for no charge at all, just to talk about these things and to get a grip on where they're currently at and what help them visualize where they could potentially be.
Sure.
So I think that's another differentiator about InfoSystems. Not many companies will do that, especially with senior level resources. So, but anyway, again, thanks for coming out today, and it was great talking to you.
Good deal. Thanks, everyone.